Welcome back to the NeuroDiverse Couples Coaches Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Stephanie Holmes. I am in a neurodiverse relationship, and the Coaches Corner, while it's open to everyone, our target audience are those who work with neurodiverse relationships. Usually my co-host is Barbara Grant, but she was unable to make it this time. So you might recognize the voice of Jeremy Rochford, who joins us often on Just the Guys with Dan. So Jeremy, introduce yourself for those who may not recognize your voice.
Oh, awesome, Stephanie. Thank you. My name is Jeremy Rochford. I am the director of NeuroFam, which is a coaching. We do so many things over there, but we really focus on mixed neurotypes couples as well as adolescent autistics looking to launch into adulthood. Likewise, part of a neurodiverse marriage, I am the autistic in the family. My wife, Charity, is the neurotypical and sometimes the sanest one. We also have our own podcast called Neuro FM, where we attempt to be the least depressing neurodivergent podcast in the world. So today is not about me, though. It's not about Stephanie. It's about none other than Dr. Tony Attwood. We are discussing his brand new book, co-written with Maxine Aston, Relationship Counseling with Autistic Neurodiverse Couples, a guide for professionals. If you know Tony Attwood, then this gentleman needs no introduction, but you may not know. I know him. He is one of my favorite in the Mount Rushmore of individuals. We have Stephanie, Tony Attwood, and just about everyone else. My wife is super jealous of me because it was one of Dr. Attwood's videos that helped us get our daughter down the path of diagnosis. But if you don't know him, no worries. He is a clinical psychologist who has specialized in autism spectrum disorder since he was qualified as a clinical psychologist in England in 1975. He is one of the first to have written about Asperger syndrome. In 1997, a book came out entitled Asperger Syndrome, a guide for parents and professionals. I am going to stop rambling, Dr. Tony. Without further ado, welcome to the show.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy and Stephanie. I'm delighted to be here, especially for that introduction.
Wasn't that great? You did a great job.
It was superb. The thing is, though, you set everybody up. Now thinking, okay, who is this wonder guy? And they go, well, he was all right. It wasn't that good.
Sorry, I should have lowered expectations. And then
yes, you win with the accent. We go from my Southern accent to your British accent. So you win with your accent.
Well, no, I will change that. You have the accent. I speak English.
That's true. Fair. That's true. Well, if you've listened to me talk about my admiration for Dr. Tony as well, the book Asperger Syndrome, one of the original books on Asperger Syndrome, was how we got my daughter down the road to diagnosis, which was a very difficult thing in 2005. And because of the book and because of the guideline in the back, that also helped us to our journey. So he got a YouTube, I got the book, and you kind of winced a little bit when he said 1975. I think that snuck up on you when he said 1975.
Well, yes, but it's important because in 1975, our concept of autism was a very conspicuously different individual with very high support needs, great difficulties in learning to speak, self-care skills, etc. And we now know that autism moves through the continuum of abilities to those who have very advanced and very valued skills. But some of the major difficulties, that is understanding people, remain. And it's using your intellect at times rather than intuition to read social situations. So I've been on a journey as we've discovered autism, originally in my early years, a view of an expression of schizophrenia or psychosis, to realize that it's part of neurodiversity. Your brain is wired differently, not necessarily defectively. It's like being left-handed, but they will face challenges that other people may not recognize and need support rather than criticism.
Absolutely. And I want to give a nod to another kind of OG, Maxine Aston. She's been writing about this for a really long time. She's one of the co-authors of the book. Her materials and references are still wonderful. So I know she was not able to join us, but let's give a shout out to her. She's been around doing a lot of writing on this in this field for a really long time. So great asset to this community.
Indeed, we first met, I think it may have been either in the UK or it may have been in America at a conference. And she has explored as a relationship counselor herself all the issues in couples counseling. And when we made the suggestion of doing some research and writing a book together, we sort of superficially knew each other, but we got to know each other and admire each other since then. So I am very honored that it is a book by both of us.
All right, well, let's start things off. Jeremy, will you start us off with our first question for Dr. Tony today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love the book. I love the resource it is and can be for everyone in this space. But that kind of leads us into one of our first questions, which is, the book is very heavy on helping, I'll say us, because we fall under that coaches and clinicians side of things. So beyond knowing and learning more about autism and being trained in those traits, what other trainings should clinicians or mental health professionals seek so that they can see, ooh, is this autism? Or, oh, okay, it presented as autism, but it may actually be narcissism or OCD or something of the such. So what other additional trainings beyond just becoming autistically aware should professionals seek?
Okay, I think there are several things here. One is, yes, become aware of and knowledgeable in autism, but our understanding of autism changes over time. Now, when you do your training, it's frozen at that time and it may be obsolete. For example, you're mentioning autistic girls and women and camouflaging. And so it's exploring how a couple that you may be seeing may have camouflaging as one of the components, either for males or females, that can occur. So it's important to be aware, but also, I think in many ways, to have an open mind that the person with the greatest knowledge of autism is the autistic person themselves. So it's not to be the authoritarian expert who knows everything. It's to be able to listen and take the wisdom of the individual concerned, because each autistic person is unique. They have their own profile of abilities, personality, experiences, etc. So the diversity within autism, be prepared for that too. You will meet someone who is autistic, but they may be like no one autism that you've met before.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It was interesting in our research, Dr. Tony, when I asked some of those who did end up with an autism diagnosis, label, or identification, things that their clinician said, how they couldn't be autistic. It was like, well, you have a friend, you got married, you have a job, your special interest isn't weird. And it was like, one was like, you're too tall. One was, you're too short. You laughed at my joke, and autistic people don't know how to laugh at jokes. So there was all kinds of just stereotypes and misinformation that those who were, like you said, their training was frozen in whatever DSM maybe that they were trained in, perhaps.
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
Really a criticism of DSM-5, but it's the reality of the situation. Why does DSM-5 exist? It's to define people whose severity of expression is sufficient to warrant health insurance company money. And so DSM-5 has a level that the accountants will say, oh, okay, if it's that bad, we will give you some of your money back in a way. And so that means that the descriptions are very much focused on the concept of disability, that is, very significant characteristics. But when you know autism, it's not necessarily those who are going to be diagnosable. It's going to be those who have autism more as a personality characteristic, a trait or series of traits. So they're not needing necessarily psychiatric help, because DSM-5 is to access a psychiatrist, and many such individuals don't need a psychiatrist. In fact, may pull away from the possibility of a diagnosis because that indicates I've got a mental disorder, but I'm fine. I don't need psychiatry. I don't need medication, etc.
I mean, that's
Absolutely, yes.
And that's just a fascinating insight, because many of us don't look at the DSM-5 as a heightened threshold. It's kind of like the low bar, and realizing there's this chasm between reality and the quantification via the DSM-5. Like, that's fantastic. Thank you for bringing that to light.
Okay.
What do you think about out there in terminology, the broader autism phenotype? So you kind of talked about that threshold of the diagnosis, levels of support, disability, insurance, all of that good stuff. And a lot of people are talking about maybe it could be subclinical, or using the phrase the broader autism phenotype. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, first of all, I'm cautious of the broader autism phenotype because that's a genetics term. And many people don't know. What do you mean by a phenotype? I'm not sure what you mean by that. So there can be a lot of confusion. In a way, I describe it as someone who's got the characteristics, but not the disability. And that's what you need to be aware of, that this is that person's developmental history, profile of abilities. But it's part of the rich tapestry of life. It's always been here. We've always had autistic individuals, and many great advances in science and art have been made by such individuals. So we're describing a developmental history and profile that has certain characteristics in it. And this is where yes, there are those who do need support. When I'm doing what we call a diagnostic assessment, I will say at the end, today's an important day. Today was the day we discovered your autism rather than diagnosed your autism. So we use it as a concept of discovery rather than diagnosis. There are those who may need a formal diagnosis because indeed they do need psychiatric support. They may need government support in a variety of ways and finding and keeping a job, or independent living. But when we're dealing with relationships, we're dealing usually with someone whose abilities are considered more in the, shall we say, the conventional range.
Okay. So our next question was, at least, and there's research, certainly in the research I've done, that it's damaging for a couple's therapist to kind of use the same kind of modalities, thoughts on like a neurodiverse couple, that kind of taking the neurotypical model and sticking it on a neurodiverse couple because, oh, my brother or sister's nephew has autism, so I'm autism aware, but I'm going to take everything I learned from marriage and family counseling, I'm going to stick that on this neurodiverse couple. How can couples look at that experience? So many times for Jeremy and I, and maybe yourself, people have had 5, 6, 7 therapists, and they come and they're discouraged. We have the discovery or identification of autism, and there's still this thing in their head about, well, we've been trying this for 10 years. We've kind of failed with 5, 6, 7 therapists or counselors. Talk to them about kind of changing that mindset of maybe we've had 5 or 7 counselors, maybe that didn't work for us, but this is like new. We're starting new. We're not starting from 10 failed attempts at counseling. How would you help them kind of change that lens, that you're finally trying something that could work based on knowing your neurology and your differences? It's a new approach. How could you help them change that lens?
Okay, I think one of the difficulties in the counseling for an autistic individual is you may only have one attempt, and if it doesn't work, that's it. It's called black and white thinking. I tried relationship counseling, it didn't work, therefore it doesn't work, rather than relationship counseling with that individual wasn't successful for a variety of reasons. So I think that's one of the things that you have, is that you find many autistic individuals are resistant to going to try and strike lucky and find a therapist that connects with them. It's also, secondly, another component of autism is that the person can very quickly like or not like someone. And that can be a fairly quick decision. And once the decision is made, I don't like them, then they're not going to say, oh, hang on, first thoughts, well, I didn't like them at first, but I like them now. Yes, I've changed my mind. So there can be an instantaneous change. The thing is, you've got to find someone that connects with both partners. And there may be very different expectations. So it's how much training does the relationship counselor have or knowledge in the area of autism, but do they match the personalities of the individuals concerned? I say, do they speak each other's language? And what I find when I'm doing relationship counseling, I'm really working as a translator of two different cultures. One is not superior to the other. And I'll get, say, maybe an autistic husband who says, my wife doesn't get it. And she just doesn't. And so I'll say, and I'll turn to the wife and explain it in neurotypical speak. And the wife will go, oh, you mean, oh, well, that's it. And then, well, can you tell him this? Because when I say this, he doesn't get it. And I'll explain it in autism. And he'll go, yeah, I get it now. So it is being able to translate two different ways. My own description of autism, not diagnosis, description, is, first of all, it's somebody who in life has found something more interesting than socializing. But another thing, autism is a different way of perceiving, thinking, learning, and relating. Different way of perceiving sounds, perceiving patterns, different way of thinking outside the box, can be really patterns and so on. But it's also a different way of learning, often solitary learning. And relationship counseling is a social experience. And so you're trying to get developments in a channel that is not that person's first choice, but is also different forms of relationship. Because sometimes for an autistic person, a good evening is just sitting in a room in separate chairs with a connection. Whereas we didn't do it. We didn't talk. We didn't disclose our feelings, and the person was content to just be in the same room together. So it's understanding it's almost like a different culture. And there is a certain expectation. The person speaks with an American accent. The family's been in America for 10 generations, so they are American. No, they're autistic.
All right. Jeremy, what's the next question you want to ask Dr. Tony?
Well, it's kind of piggybacking on something you said earlier about how, it would really much benefit the clinician to listen to the autistic, to get to know them, piggybacking on things that you've said before, right? One autistic, you've met one autistic, and we're all different. It's a spectrum. But this is where my bias comes in, and I'd love your perspective on this. So before my kind of mental transformation, going from, hey, I'm autistic and completely aloof, to there's a whole new world at the outside of this that my wife is a part of, that I could be a part of too. I had a physical transformation where I lost a bunch of weight. And so in my journey of trying to learn empathy and social cues and get to learn how to express my feelings in ways that not only are edifying to me, but my wife would understand, I looked at the process very similar to how I would condition my body in terms of setting expectations. If you go 60 years without stretching, you're not going to be flexible within 4 weeks. You have to have an expectation for the behavior to match the outcome. And so my curiosity is kind of looking at the brain the same way, if we could. Like, what are realistic expectations of individuals who may be on the spectrum in terms of acquiring these skills, whether it's learning to be empathetic or learning the patterns that lead to adapting to social cues and things like that?
Okay. I think that one of the things I've always recognized is the capability of an autistic person to acquire particular skills. But there are several issues. One is motivation. Yeah. There needs to be motivation to do this for the benefit often of the autistic person themselves and other people. So you've got to have somebody who feels it's worthwhile investing time, if not money, in what we're going to do. Secondly, a part of autism can be fear of making a mistake and getting things wrong. So if they are on the journey of developing particular skills, they need constructive feedback, not overly demonstrative. It's basically saying, rather than, oh, you've made my day that you said that, is, wow, thank you. That was a wise thing to say. That has really helped. So you've got to pitch your encouragement at a way that the autistic person appreciates, rather than effusive affection, which actually can be quite unpleasant and difficult for the autistic person. But it's also recognizing the challenges or the barriers to success. And you mentioned there about feelings. And two things that we found in autism that I think are very important, and that's issues of interoception and alexithymia. Interoception is the ability to pick up signals within the body, heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, etc., that indicate agitation may be increasing. And often in autism, there's a mind-body division. So the mind isn't tuned into the signals of increasing emotion, concern. But then the next part is, if you're not good at picking up the internal signals of what your feelings inside are going to be, then you have alexithymia, which is, I haven't got a vocabulary for it. I need a language for my worries. Now, one of the problems of conventional relationship counseling is, how do you feel about this? And what are your feelings now? And tell me, how do you feel about that? And the autistic person says, I don't know. Come on, you're not taking this seriously. I just don't know. Come on, you're being obtuse. How do you are a CEO of a big international company. What do you mean you don't know how you feel? You're not taking this seriously. But it's a genuine problem. And so it's a way of working around that. We use strategies, for example, that with alexithymia, it's actually to say the word. And so when I'm doing relationship counseling, I'll say, write your partner a poem. And there's an eloquence in the poem that's extraordinary. Create a playlist that in the music or the lyrics, it describes your feelings. You are a great fan of Harry Potter. Choose a scene from Harry Potter. Boggarts are anxiety and Dementors are depression. And there's some wonderful bits. So in other words, I can take a scene from a movie or a passage from a book. I can use the circle of emotions. But if you say to an autistic individual how you're feeling and they say they don't know, you assume they're doing it deliberately to be evasive. But it's a genuine difficulty. So the next stage of the journey is being creative in improving communication. So it's finding an autism-friendly way of self-disclosure for both parties. This is also where we have the double empathy problem, that as much as an autistic individual may not read their partner's face very well, the non-autistic partner often says, what's going on in your mind? I can't read your face. Your face is still. Are you sad? No, I'm okay. But you look sad. What do you mean I look sad? Because your face is still. You must be sad. And so it's a two-way process of understanding each other on the journey of communication and the relationship. So these are the sorts of things that both partners need to know. It's sort of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other.
I was laughing quite fervently because one of the things that almost ended my marriage was my face, because I would make this face of hyper focus that my wife she would seldom ever see. Like the only time this face would come out would be like you're signing a book contract or you're talking about a mortgage, like hyper focus. And so she used to think that face was mocking her. And so when you were talking about like the double empathy issue, like that was a huge problem in our marriage. You touched upon something that I think was brilliant, and I want to spotlight it for a moment, because what I took from that response was, whereas the neurotypical might need to develop skills, the NeuroDiverse needs to acquire the skills necessary to then acquire the skills. And I feel like that reality is necessary when it comes to setting proper expectation in this entire arc.
It is, and it can be very disappointing for the non-autistic person that there isn't a rate of progress that they're anticipating. Now, there's another dimension to this which causes confusion, and that is a characteristic of autism we originally picked up with autistic women of camouflaging. And when you camouflage, first of all, you suppress your autistic features because it marks you out as different. And you learn the script. the postures, the clothing, in a way, in acting, it's putting your costume on. And so that individual will have inclusion by observing, analyzing, imitating, creating a mask. Women can do this to a remarkable degree. They should get an Oscar for their performance as a non-autistic person. It's fabulous. But when you talk to the couple in more depth, they say, but he could do it. He could do it when we were courting. He was so attentive and realized, yes, it's an act. He got it from Hollywood romantic movies. There's the script. That's what you do, avidly watching them as a cue and, shall we say, a script of what to do. And then there's bitter disappointment that later on, that person that you knew, I know this happens in lots of relationships, but that person has become not the one that you originally fell in love with. So the view can be, I know you can because you used to do it.
Can I sit there for a second? Because I think, again, you are just dropping amazing wisdom here. So to that point, and you mentioned this in the book about how when the autistic feels comfortable, they let that mask off and then they feel like they can finally breathe because they have someone who gets them. And that's when the whole like, shock from the non-autistic is like, you stopped pursuing me. So would it be an education or a motivation point for the autistic to recognize, I don't want to say that mask should never come off, but that level of pursuit actually is the standard ongoing rather than just the standard to acquire the relationship?
I think what's needed here is a compromise. Okay. But what can be concerning for the non-autistic person, the socializing in public is phenomenal. But behind closed doors, you have somebody who's a recluse, who's very irritable. And they're saying this is where the original Cassandra phenomenon came, that people don't believe that there are issues that are faced here. What we need to do is understand each other's perspective, that the autistic individual found this stopped them being bullied at school. It allowed them to make friends and to get jobs and promotion and so on. But it was absolutely exhausting, and you're going to get autistic burnout. So it's looking at opportunities to realize that the autistic individual has actually moved a long way. And it is in many ways, it's a tribute to the non-autistic partner that they can relax and express the real self. But then the autistic person needs to know some of your characteristics are actually not good in a relationship. You come home from work and you spend your next 2 hours on your train set. Really not so good when your partner's got 4 kids to look after in that situation. I know it helps you feel better and you really need to recover from all the socializing you did at work, but I need you at home. So to help with the chores and so on. So it's really looking at what would be an effective compromise. And what I do sometimes is ask the guys, when you first met, what was it that you really liked about your partner that led you to fall in love with them? And we find some very interesting answers in that. And what's happening is that the non-autistic person is very much admiring the positive qualities of autism because they're not seeing the not so good. There's the honesty, the integrity, the attention to detail, the career, all those sorts of things. And as far as the autistic person is concerned, that's there. But the other parts, they may not have had guidance in what to do. They're very encouraging for beginning the act and it's successful. But there's nobody giving the help. And that's one of the things that the autistic partner may say. I fell in love with my non-autistic partner because she seemed to understand me better than anyone else. They accepted me. And I felt relaxed and comfortable in their company. So it's going through, right, okay, what about now? Things have changed. Well, some of those things are not necessarily dead, but they're things that you can actually go back to. What is it about your personalities, the things that you like to do together? You started to, shall we say, drift apart, but there is still that connection, and it's a bit of nostalgia to go back to those particular experiences.
Yeah, so I want to switch us to couples and kind of piggyback on something that you said. I think what was confusing for me as the non-autistic partner, now we were dating and married before cell phones and YouTubes and all of that. But Dan would usually quote lyrics from music and say, you know, when I heard this song, you know, I thought about you, make me a mixtape, or from his big record collection, or record a song onto a cassette tape. And it was so confusing because his letters or songs or poems were so elegant, and the vocabulary, and they were so deep and meaningful. And then to try to get into a conversation, couldn't do that in real time. And so it felt very confusing to me in my younger years. It's like, here's this elegant vocabulary that can say these very deep things, and we can't have a basic conversation about feelings. That felt like a bait and switch.
Yeah, you said the key word, conversation. In other words, those abilities are there. Oh, absolutely, they are there. And in fact, a considerable proportion of autistic individuals go into the arts, and they find that through the arts, they have the ability to express the self and their feelings. It can be and I love going through solo singer-songwriters and spotting the autistic individuals. Also people like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who I met, and so on. So you have someone who has that creativity, that eloquence, but the expectation is face-to-face conversation. And that's not necessarily the autistic way. And so the person is expecting this eloquent, charismatic individual, but it may be through the arts rather than necessarily the art of conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, to all those things. So sometimes when a couple, there's identification, there's a discovery, there's all kinds of responses to that. So how can couples start to redefine their relationship into what it could look like in a more positive manner with realistic expectations and shifting? Sometimes the non-autistic women still think like therapy or counseling is to morph their non-autistic husband into this idealized neurotypical man, because if he was neurotypical, he would get it. I remind them, neurotypical men go to couples counseling too. They are not perfect. They are not getting it. But in kind of changing that expectation and shifting versus like lowering our expectation and just all the things that aren't going to be right. How do you help a couple put that a different lens, a positive shift onto their neurotypes?
Okay, obviously at the beginning, you're talking about the positives in the relationship. In what way do you get on? Well, we're cohesive with this and so on. Okay, so what are the areas that are conflict, abrasive, or concerned that you'd like to change? One of the things we do right at the beginning is if we're doing group work with 4 or 5 couples, what we often do is in one room, we have the autistic partners, and the other room, the non-autistic. And we go through, what would you like your autistic partner to really understand about you? And often that comes out, what I'm feeling and so on. And one of the things that we then get the autistic individual, what my partner doesn't seem to understand is when I'm at work, I'm not thinking of them. And that's it. That's I am totally devoted to work, but what's going on? Please don't interrupt me in that situation. And so we then get back together and go through various things. And we may say to sometimes the autistic partner, look, autism has given you a great problem-solving mind. You are paid a fortune by your company to solve problems that nobody else can solve. You're very practical, and you will find a resolution to something that nobody else has really thoroughly understood. Great. But your partner wants you to do something completely different. Not solve the problem. Listen. And please don't be on your iPhone as you're listening. Okay, and Stephanie, you've just done it. You're nodding and smiling, and that's what you need to do. What I say to the usually male, I say, look, when two women are together or a group of women, what do? They nod and smile, and they go, it's what I call cow noises, etc. So you need to do that, because often the autistic person is listening but not looking, is not making oh dear, what happened next? So it looks as though they're not connected, but in fact they are. So we will go through what are the aspects of concern and then almost create a hierarchy, because there are big issues that really need to be resolved at some stage, but not yet. You've got to start small, and you've got to show success. You've got to look at what can be cooperative, what can be the barriers. And as much as in autism there's a fear of failure, there's an enormous delight in getting something right. So there needs to be the feel for the momentum to work through those particular issues. So it's finding out, take something that's relatively easy to explain, understand, and to work on to get that positive role.
And to a thought that when it comes to couples who are wanting to put in the work, is it, from your perspective, advised for the couples to do solo work first to both educate themselves on autism and how it affects the marriage? Or do you think getting together as a couple first to set these standards and to bond, to connect is the best path? Is it different for each couple? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's different for each couple, and there may be different things in various components. What we do tend to find is that, I think I mentioned earlier, that a trio is not an easy social situation for an autistic person. And so what the relationship counselor may have is a collection of texts. Artificial intelligence is really good at doing this, or videos or something, so that there is something that the autistic individual can go away and do on their own, which is their way of learning. Often their way of learning is solitary learning, because otherwise you've got the dimensions of social, which can be exhausting and confusing. So it may well be that, for example, the non-autistic individual wants to express concerns about intimacy, for example, but doesn't want their partner at this stage to tune in. But they want to talk about it is, are my assumptions correct here? What can I do about this, etc.? And so it may well be that there are sort of private conversations that are needed, but there's also issues that are going to occur if there are children, a potential conflict in terms of different child rearing practices. And this can be an area of conflict that needs to be considered. So it's not just the couple, it's the dynamics within the family need to be concerned. Of concern.
And I think that's where a lot of people who had marriage and family training, where you're trained, you keep the couple together all the time. The marriage, the relationship is the clients. They don't understand sometimes needing to talk one-on-one, or maybe working with, like Jeremy and I share a lot of clients. So sometimes maybe the guy is just newly identified and really wants to kind of talk through, what does that mean? What's me? What's my neurotype? What's my personality? Kind of a discovery phase. And maybe the wife is a little bit on what does this mean? Grief, up and down phase. And they're not in the same space to really start doing that marriage work. So we kind of have like a group of colleagues. It's like, oh, this person's really great at executive function. This person's really great at teaching boundaries. This person's really great at this. And we kind of like go between ourselves on who's got a skill. And then we sometimes share, that together. And that's confusing sometimes when couples have been through traditional therapy. No, we're supposed to stay together all the time. We're supposed to always be a couple all the time. We're supposed to, and that doesn't compute for a lot of clinicians. But you're saying that's really important to really kind of think about that for that couple, that it's probably not best to keep them together all the time in their sessions.
Okay, I think you've got to look at each situation because the degree of animosity can be a concern, particularly if there's an autistic child in the family. Because autistic kids are incredibly sensitive to tension. May not understand why it's occurring, but they have a phenomenal emotional empathy and just know when a parent is upset, which can be very distressing for the autistic individual and maybe a contributory factor for a number of concerns at home and school, for example. So we've got to look at the implications for all concerned. And unfortunately, there can be a tendency to say things in the heat of the moment, which children can hear, especially autistic kids who have phenomenal hearing. And they're upstairs and they're not supposed to hear it, but they are hearing it. And there's all sorts of confusion about that. So that's where we've got to look at as they're working through their relationship, it's a relationship within the context of the family.
No, I laugh because I had to, my television viewing had to get very edited once my kids became old enough to repeat certain things. So they are always attentive and paying attention.
Yeah. Now, I know you've got your list of questions, but I'm just aware of time. And there's a theme that needs to be explored further, and that is autistic women in a relationship. Mm-hmm. Many of the examples we've used has been the autistic person is male. But we now know that the ratio of males to females in autism is 2 to 1. And so the relationship counselor may have before them a non-autistic partner and an autistic female partner. And that's a whole new ball game in a variety of areas.
Well, let's start that. I mean, I'm the mother of a daughter, and actually, funny enough, because I got kind of so good at identifying females, I missed my husband until we were 20 years into marriage. I was like, where did this come from? I can spot it in females better than males. So let's kind of shift to some of those differences, because many times women are identified later in life. They've gone through a litany of all these other diagnoses and identifications, which could also induce shame. So will you kind of tell the clinicians, coaches out there, what are some of those differences, or how would they spot a woman on the spectrum?
Okay, first of all, she may have developed camouflaging, so she knows what to wear, what to say, what to do, etc. And so superficially may not have any suggestions of autism, but has coped by, should we say, suppressing their true character and becoming the person necessary for the situation. However, there are certain people throughout childhood and the early adult years in particular, the predators who spot somebody who's different. And so she's likely to have had a history of trauma and abuse. Now, that trauma may start because of bullying and teasing from others, but also not understanding relationship predators. Has low self-esteem. I'm no good. I can't expect anything more than this. Their lack of resilience and independence means that they are easy targets for those who take advantage of their naivety. They take somebody by what they say than what they intend. And so there's a history of issues of trust and trauma for that particular person. There's also the expectation from society in many ways of females to be able to express affection more easily and comfortably than males. But this particular autistic woman may not take easily to using the affection and the intimacy that is anticipated. And so the individual isn't fulfilling the expectations. It can be that there is a concern that the autistic woman seems to be coping very well in social situations, but is then exhausted and seeks solitude for recovery. And their partner may feel, what do I do? They're stressed out, but their mind, if not physically, is closed off. in that. There's also going to be the issues of intimacy and sensory sensitivity that are going to occur. So there are expectations in being a mum. Autistic mums can be excellent mums, but they're often unconventional mothers in a variety of ways. They're not into the social networking with the other mums. Oh, I've got to organize a birthday party. I hate birthday parties. I've always hated birthday parties. But my daughter needs one, so we're going to have to do it. I'm going to have to talk to the other parents outside the classroom door, all those sorts of things. And people may not realize the stress and strain that person is going through in giving the archetypal typical mum and partner in that situation. So we do need to recognize that there are female autistic partners.
Yeah, I have a meetup group for autistic women, and one of the ladies said that was one of the things that was really hard for her in trying to help her children network, is because their child would come to them and say, "Mom, will you become friends with so-and-so's mom so we can do a play date?" And she would say, "No, I don't like them. So we're going to have to figure out another way to get y'all as a play date, because I don't want to pretend to be her friend or like them so that you can get a play date." So that became, she's like building those networks and trying to, she would do it for her child before herself, but I'm not going to pretend to be a friend or do something that I don't want to do.
It is. The person knows what's the convention, and I'm prepared to be flexible in doing that, but it is at considerable cost. And it's also enjoying uninterrupted solitude, but also in being a mum, there's the sensory experiences with kids who are climbing all over you, all the body odors and things like that that's occurring, all the things that you've got to do. And the person may not communicate the challenges that they're facing because the mask is there. But the burnout, the autistic burnout of autistic women, that rate is very high.
So that leads us to another question. In some of the research that I had found, it suggested that two autistic people together would have a better outcome. But that's not what I found in my research. So I'd love to know what you have found in some of the couples, because I tended to find the sensory profiles was more important than the autism, so to speak. If one was sensory averse and one is sensory seeking, while they might kind of get each other and understand each kind of neurodivergencies, the sensory profiles tended to be pretty significant. The passionate interest could be divisive sometimes. And then the kids, if you've got autistic kids and they have their own, and everybody wants to be in their own world, but connect with me and mine. So I didn't find it to be an easier dynamic. I found it to be, I get you more and you get me more. And so we don't have to mask around each other, but they still struggled with some of their conversation and communication in a mixed neurodiverse couple. But what have you seen in when both are autistic?
Okay. It really depends on the profile. I describe autism, and certainly in diagnosis discovery, it's like completing a 100-piece jigsaw puzzle. Each piece of the puzzle is a fragment of autism. There are certain essential corner piecing and edging pieces, but the diagnosis or discovery is confirmed if you've got 80 or more pieces. I've never met anyone with 100 pieces, and I've never met anyone with no pieces. The general range is sort of 10 to 60 or so. But it means that the autism profile and developmental history and personality is going to be different, but there are going to be common areas. One of the things that I find is that friendship may be easier for two autistic individuals, talking about girls and women. You may get two autistic girls that are in the playground, sitting on a bench, drawing anime together. They are not talking, but they're connected. And there just seems to be, shall we say, a link between them that they are both enjoying, but they're not gossiping. They're not talking about boys. They're not being mean to other kids and things like that. And then at the end, they'll just look at their friend, nice drawing, and off they go. And so there may be common ground initially because of quite content with silence. And that's one of the things that I find in relationship counseling is the counselor, please accept silence, because the autistic person is processing and you need to just not interrupt. You've just made a profound paradigm shift of information and the person is still cognitively processing it. Please don't interrupt them when they're doing that. But when you've got a relationship, there are certain commonalities. So I say that to a certain extent, their nice evening or an enjoyable evening is that they're both on their iPhones searching up about whatever it is, and that was a good evening. So it can be differences in that way. But part of autism is a difficulty in communication. So you've got two people with communication difficulties. You've also got sensory difficulties. Both have probably had a history of trauma in their experiences, which are going to affect any relationship. And the person, I know we talk about relationship counseling, they may need trauma counseling for what's occurred, especially for autistic women too. But also their ability to see each other's perspective and work constructively may be partially inhibited by the autism. So you can see that there could be jigsaw puzzle, a better fit, but it doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a perfect fit, because there are still issues.
Well, and to that as well, if each have a different hyper sense of justice and rigid feeling of how a house should be run, then that is just conflict waiting to happen.
It is. But also in autism, you've got a predisposition for ADHD and executive functioning. And this can be a major source of conflict within the family. And it may be two autistic ADHDers. The one may have the ADHD. Projects are never finished. The place is a mess. They can't get started. There's all sorts of executive organizing, planning, time management, prioritization problems. But then the other autistic partner is very exact, and everything has to be symmetrical and neat and tidy. So you may have two very different styles of households. One, the house is full of unfinished projects, and the other one, the partner is forever tidying up and making everything symmetrical.
You just described one of my daughter's marriages right there. How would you know? Unfinished projects and symmetry and very measured situation. One of the last questions, since we're not going to have too much time to go into too many other things, I do want to address something that I hear a lot. And how would you approach the non-autistic partner who wants to maybe weaponize this new identification or discovery, or you're the one with the autism, I'm the one that's normal, I'm the one that doesn't need, I shouldn't have to do any relationship work, I don't need to do any work, you need to go off and you need to go get help, and then we'll go to some kind of relationship counseling. So have you ever seen or observed kind of weaponizing of the diagnosis or identification?
Absolutely. All the problems are in the autistic individual. But then there can be a problem that the autistic individual starts to show progress in a particular direction. And the non-autistic person, it's fake. You're saying it because you're supposed to saying it, but you don't really mean it. Because that's what you're supposed to say. It's not genuine. You give me a hug, but it's like hugging a piece of wood. You hug, but it doesn't have any feeling to it, etc. So it is very difficult. And it is very much going through with a non-autistic person and explaining to them what can change and what can't change. What do you need to accept? And look at the positive side of the relationship. And what are the things that can be changed, but are going to be changed in a constructive way? But the blame processing can be phenomenal. And it means that the autistic person feels a failure. My partner has expectations, I can't meet them. She expects me to read her face and body language, and I can't read it. I'm forever disappointing her. I can never do it right. And so the autistic partner can have a sense of depression and dejection, is I'm just not good enough, and I never will be.
There's a catch-22, because I'll hear, well, Dr. Stephanie, we did the thing. I put it into motion. And then she said, well, you just said that because Dr. Stephanie said to. And I was like, isn't that why they're talking to me? So that I can help give them suggestions.
In other words, Stephanie, you're doing your job.
So they did it. I do hear that catch-22. If I continue to do this other way, it's a problem. If I come and I try the new thing and it's a little rigid or wooden and it's not quite there, but I'm trying something new, but it didn't come off the way the non-autistic spouse wanted, I get in trouble because I didn't do it enough. I didn't do it warm enough. I didn't do it this enough. And then it's, well, you're just doing that. You don't really want to. It's because Dr. Stephanie told you to.
Yeah. I think if I go deeper here, there can be a feeling for the non-autistic partner. Have I wasted my time with you? Mm-hmm. And if I'd have married, I had a choice of two. If I'd have married the other person, would my life have been different? So there can be a sense of regret that time is going fast and what could have been if they hadn't met. So there can be a sense of almost revenge on that individual, which is not constructive in a relationship.
Jeremy, you got one more question you want to throw out there while we're kind of ending our time together with Dr. Tony?
No, well, I think more of a clarification, because it feels like everything that we discussed, if we were trying to wrap it up into one nice, tidy bow, is it really starts with communication and really trying to anchor your relationship in that communication so both parties can be seen, heard, validated, and then on the same page as to what needs to happen next. So both parties can have the best relationship possible, which then if there's kids involved would allow the family unit to have the best experience possible. Is that a fair takeaway?
I totally endorse it, as exactly as you say. The issue is communication. Communication in so many different ways. But in relationship counseling, if there's one word that describes it, it's communication.
And I think it's learning to, one of the evidence-based therapies out there, Dr. Gottman, he uses a lot of scripts. He uses a lot of guidelines for communication. And sometimes I'll have the non-autistic partner really fighting using any kind of scripts or guidelines. And I'm like, hey, Gottman uses them with neurotypical couples. Like, what's the deal? So I'll kind of find that pushback that there's this, well, if it's not authentic or spontaneous and we can't just speak off the cuff and have our communication in any way, shape, or form, any time of the day, then somehow it's less than, it's not real, it's not deep, it's not relational. And that kind of, I guess, I don't know, that mindset can really do some damage when you're trying to kind of come to the middle and learn new ways of communicating with each other.
Especially if the autistic individual is trying to improve, but the person is using criticism rather than encouragement. It's not good enough is a terrible comment for an individual who's trying the best that they can. And then the person thinks, why should I bother? Because I'll never be good enough for you.
And we don't want that, right? Especially when there's motivation and trying. And again, we always say that we're not trying to make a neurotypical to neurotypical relationship. We're trying to build the best potential, that optimize what you have with who you are and build the relationship that's going to work for each of you. And that sometimes is a hard concept to grasp because we want the Hallmark or the Disney or the romance novel instead of, well, that's not what we have. That's not realistic. And we're going to go with the skills that we have and try to go through the challenges that you each have. Yeah. And it's going to look different than somebody else's relationship.
It is. And once you got to know the couple for a while and they come in and sit down and they hold hands, that is a revelation, because when they first came in, the degree of animosity and sitting in chairs as far away apart as possible and start to move together, and the joy and so on, in a sense of a counselor, psychologist, etc. That's a phenomenal moment when you've got that greater degree of connection, which is possible. And that's what we strive to do.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Jeremy, for co-hosting with me today and filling in. Thank you, Dr. Tony, for everything that you've done for the community, all of your research over these decades. You greatly impacted my family. You've impacted Jeremy's family. Your work is so important. So thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you. I'm absolute delight, and I'm delighted to actually, if anybody's tuned in, don't forget, get a copy of Relationship Counseling with Autistic Neurodiverse Couples by Maxine and I. That's it. I really do appreciate the royalties.
All right. Well, and we will put the link in the show notes to the book.
Thank you.
Okay. And I have to say, I was reading it and I saw a few times Holmes, S. I didn't realize that was me. I thought there must be another Holmes, S. And I was like, that's me. Oh my gosh, that's me.
Indeed. So in many ways, you're in there too.
I'm a little bit in there 4 times. So, all right, everyone, as we are ending our show together, we always like to remind you that there is hope for your future and you're not alone on this journey.